Story time. In my younger years, a friend of mine had asked if I had heard of a little indie game known as Spark the Electric Jester. Naturally, not knowing anything about it, he said, "Oh dude, it's like Sonic." Now, I don't know if you know this about me, but I love Sonic the Hedgehog and all of its flaws, so that was enough to intrigue me to learn more. He then said something like, "Yeah man, it's pretty cool, plus check out the music." I mean, how could that not leave an impression on me? Unfortunately, that's where this story time ends, because I was only a kid with limited birthday money and probably prioritized something like the new Mario or Sonic at the time. However, that doesn't mean that I completely forgot about the yellow hooligan. Ah, the perks of adult money. To say that Spark the Electric Jester wears its inspiration on its sleeve is an understatement. Lake Feppard, the developer, is a clear Sonic fan. He had worked on and created fan games for Sonic in the past, with the notable one being Sonic, after the sequel. A typical fan game with their own spin on Sonic's journey through the levels and a tango with Eggman, but with the added spice of certain power-ups. This became the clear framework for what would eventually become Spark. A side-scrolling, speed-based platformer like the Sonic games on the Genesis, with the generous peppering of power-ups like you'd find in a Kirby game circa Superstar on the SNES. That is what makes Spark stand out. In the Genesis Sonic games, you got to have the thrill of a fast-paced platformer, but you only ever had 2 to 3 ways of dealing with enemies. In Kirby, you are not nearly as fast as the Blue Blur, but the sheer expanse of the power-ups at your disposal makes sure you have plenty of options to choose from when dealing with any adorable cutie patootie in your way. No! Spark takes the best of both worlds and intertwines them nicely throughout the game. If you played a Sonic game before, then you'll be acclimated to Spark's playstyle in no time. Momentum is key. To whiz through levels in a flash, you have to be able to use slopes and loops to your advantage. To help with upward slopes and inclines, Spark does come with his own dash that you can use. It gives a little burst of speed and is mainly used to climb up those upward slopes. The dash isn't something to be used mindlessly though, because using it while you've gathered enough momentum and speed while going down a hill will actually slow you down. Properly utilizing the dash is a skill in its own right, but you'll get the hang of it pretty quickly. The dash can also be used as an evasive maneuver in combat with the right timing. Fortunately, it's not something you need to rely on since Spark isn't afraid to get into a tussle, but it's nice to have. Spark can obtain quite the array of power-ups throughout all of the stages, but he's plenty capable unarmed as well. The more you attack things without getting hit yourself, a blue bar under your health will actually fill up. This static bar, as it's called, once completely filled, will allow Spark to unleash a devastating charged attack. This attack will vary depending on the power-up that you have, but it's something to strive for regardless. Even without using the charged attack, each power-up provides a unique change to the gameplay, whether it be through its combat prowess capabilities or its usefulness during platforming. Each power-up adds a nice flair to change things up, and I encourage you to experiment and see which one works for you. Just like a Kirby game, you'll eventually find which power-ups jive with you the most. Now, this tip comes from your old pal Aphrodite here, because I don't think the game explains it thoroughly. But as you continue to tear through all the robots that stand in your way, make sure to pick up as many of these little pips, I'll call them, as you can. It takes a lot of them, but when you have enough, it'll fill up the thin bar right above your health bar. This is your extra life that comes quite in handy. The game makes sure to sprinkle enough save points throughout, but it's nice to prevent a setback no matter how small where you can. As much as I've praised the game this far, I'd be lying if I said that it was a perfect game. There are small things like grammatical errors that I can overlook since Lake Feppard is from Brazil, and sometimes the text overflows into the next line, but that happens very rarely. However, there are some bigger issues that should be mentioned. One issue becomes immediate once you start the game. The window is small, so I thought I could just adjust the size of it with the in-game settings. But that whole process is completely bored. Fortunately, you can still expand the window from the window itself. Now, what I'd argue is the biggest issue here with the game right now is that closing the pause menu crashes the game for some reason. This is probably a new bug because I don't remember this happening before, and you need the pause menu to see what power-ups are even capable of. Fortunately, there are a plentiful amount of save points scattered throughout the levels to make sure your progress is not too lost, but even I gotta admit, it's pretty damn annoying to have a kill switch on your controller. That's about where my complaints end though. Even through some of its glaring imperfections, Spark still proves to be a great game because it wins you over with what it does right. Take the stages themselves for instance. Most of them are split up into multiple acts, so to say, with each act being different enough from one another, but the transition is borderline seamless, keeping up the flow of the game beautifully. Another has to do with the power-ups. I'm sure more than one of them would catch your eye. So to help you avoid the risk of indecision, you are able to store a power-up for later, effectively giving you 2 power-ups to switch between at any given time. I mainly use it to have one power-up I like to use for combat and another to use for platforming. Not to mention that the aesthetics of the whole game are just spot on. The music is an absolute treat to the ears. It was one of the hooks that the game had sunk into me after all. That bass is just so juicy. It's like a plum I want to take a bite out of. Actually, wait, do I have a plum? Hold on, let me see. Okay, I got okay, it might not be a plum, but I got a strawberry. That's the bass right there, see that? That's so dumb. The graphics are also great to look at. The game has a nice, vibrant color palette with nicely hand-drawn assets, even down to the cutscenes. Although those can look a little rough around the edges as well, I think that actually just adds to the charm. This is clearly a game with a lot of love and passion put into it, and it oozes from every inch of the screen. In a world where AI is without the regulations it should have, especially when it comes to art, it makes something like Spark really impactful. I understand AI can be used as a helpful tool in some regards. I believe it could be used to make certain processes more efficient. I mean, look at some of the tools in Adobe software. But the key word there being processes. In the advent of AI art, it's clear that art itself is not getting the respect it deserves. People just want the end product and for it to be done quickly, in essence, to remove the process. But to do that would make us less human. At least when it comes to art, AI can only ever imitate. It only knows how to spit out a smeared amalgamation of what it has seen, whatever it has stolen. AI cannot come up with anything that is truly original. AI is incapable of imagination. Part of the process is failing, and learning from those failures to be better, to strive to be better, to overcome. Just look at your favorite piece of media, and just see what people have been able to come up with. Even if it is derivative, you could see the changes made to make each creation stand out from one another. AI is only able to do what it can now because of the breakthroughs that people have made on their own. It lacks the heart and purpose behind each decision made when creating something that can only come from a human being. That's what makes art special. Look, call me a Luddite if you want, but I also think it's pretty backwards that AI is being used to create art so that I could go and do something like my dishes more often? Yeah, alright. I bring this up because Spark's story, as simple as it is, talks about that kind of issue, albeit in a more humorous manner, but topical all the same. Spark has a college degree, and yet he gets replaced at his job by a robot. Not once, but twice, leaving him unemployed. He's like me for real. It's when he sees that robots start to turn bad and hurt people that he leaps into action, busting through every robot in his way and eventually finding the head honcho behind all of it, Freon. He only knew about Freon thanks to a resistance group that formed, and the doctor that leads the group even hired Spark for the job. I mean, just look at his face when he realized he's employed again. He's like me for real! The resistance group is where Spark also learns that one of the robots that replaced him, Fark, Spark's idea, is a double agent of sorts. Once you beat Spark's story, you actually get to play through Fark's story as well. I was actually surprised by just how different Fark plays compared to Spark. Fark, unlike the game's namesake, has a smaller health pool and cannot access any power-ups. This leads to his playstyle heavily focusing on the static bar, which I'd argue is actually done way better than in Spark's story. Along with the normal methods of filling up the static bar, Fark also has a parry that can build static and protect you from hits as well. The static bar can now do two things. The first being that after hitting a certain threshold, you can redeem the static energy to replenish any lost health and enter a state where Fark becomes much faster, hits harder, and attacks reach farther until the static energy until the static energy depletes. The second happens only when you fill up the static bar. Fark enters a super state where he can move much faster and is able to wield the spear that he uses in his boss fight against Spark. This lasts for as long as you don't get hit, because even an uncovered sneeze will pop Fark right out of it. Hit you! Now fuck! I really enjoy Fark's story because of just how dynamic the systems are with what is almost just the base kit that you normally start out with. Managing the static bar is actually exhilarating. Now add that on top of the other stuff Fark can do, like running up any wall, a double jump, and a dash that can be used in the air. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but spamming the dash can just make Fark borderline fly. Spark the Electric Jester as a whole was a treat to experience. Being able to see something made with the best aspects of platformers from both sides of the gaming aisle is truly something special. You know what? Back to story time. I remember telling that friend I mentioned earlier about how I enjoyed Spark the Electric Jester and asked if he had tried it yet. Would you believe that same friend, the guy who introduced me to the series in the first place, said something like, yeah, it's cool I guess, but I've seen how long the levels can get and I don't feel like going through that. What? Huh? This is now an impromptu call out post to that friend and anyone else out there who might feel the same. If you like Sonic, you'll like Spark. You're a gamer. Pick up the damn controller and play the damn good game. Aside from the call out, I'm glad I'm not the only one who thought this way. Because Spark the Electric Jester is only the first of a trilogy that is currently out. With how much of a good time I had with the first game, I just had to see what the sequel had in store. I have a confession I gotta make right out of the gates. I played the games out of order. I know, how taboo. I'm not exactly sure why, but something deterred me from playing Spark 2 a while back. I think by the time I checked back in and even saw that there was a second game in the series, the third game was announced, which I ended up playing instead, and I had a blast. By that point, I felt that I had seen everything that Spark had to offer. Even though that wasn't that long ago, I feel I've changed enough to recognize that I might have made a too hasty of a judgment call. After all, I hadn't played the game yet, so coming back and going through this trilogy has been a way of making up for my attitude and to finally experience that part of the series that I've been missing up until now. Right away, I could say that the jump to 3D was quite a surprise for me, especially when you consider that Spark 1 and Spark 2 are only 2 years apart. Even the models for the characters look, put those peepers away, man. Okay, so most of the models in the game look pretty good. I find that as long as the character is not a person, their design is pretty solid. Another thing that took me by surprise is that this game takes place immediately after the first game, but the series' namesake is nowhere to be found in this entry. Instead, we follow Fark and his journey throughout the entire game. Looking back, I think that might have been another factor making me resistant to try it out. Even that being the case, I still want to see what this game had to offer. And I think Fark is cool, so I'm not docking a point for that. Once again, the story is very short and sweet. This is a common trend with the series. If you want a story-driven game, you have plenty of other options elsewhere. When you play a Spark game, you play for the mechanics and maybe even the music. And that's not a knock against the series at all. Back on track, the doctor that hired Spark and created the supercomputer Megaraph in the last game is now looking over Fark. Fark wants to finally get to the bottom of who created him and why. Just before he could get the doctor to look at him, another robot jester kidnaps him. Yeah, take that freaky looking guy away, yeah! From there, it's just a matter of time before Fark gets the answers he dearly seeks. Of course, Freom's forces as well as another possible faction of robots stand in Fark's way, but they are all dealt with as they arise. Honestly, I'll just keep the story as spoiler-free as possible from here on out, because there isn't much more to go over to begin with, and it's satisfying enough for what the series brings to the table. The story can honestly be boiled down to, where's the doctor? I don't know. I'm not telling you. I'm gonna kill you now. Long story short, Fark gets his answers in the end. The gameplay is really where things get interesting. For a relatively short turnaround time, to add a third axis into the gameplay and to do it this well is impressive to say the least. If you played Fark's story in the last game, then you'll quickly pick up how he plays in this entry. You still got your static bar, dash, double jump, and parry like before. However, some new additions are that attacks have been split into degrees of light and heavy, as well as 3 new techniques to add to your arsenal. When it comes to the Jester dash, well, I'm telling you, it wears it on its sleeve. I will say though that I feel the dash has a much shorter range than I'd expect, but it's still a nice way to lock onto springs and enemies to keep up the flow of the level, or to just center yourself during platforming. The Jester charge is a charge dash to help get a burst of speed at a standstill, but it can also be used to completely stall your momentum in the air. Finally, the Jester drop is a downward dash that helps Fark get back to the ground, especially since the momentum in this game is kinda crazy. Another change is that Fark can now use power-ups. Just like the first game, you can store any spare power-ups for later, but this time you have 3 slots to do so. However, as mentioned before, the momentum in this game is crazy. I'd say combat is pretty de-emphasized this time around, because with the exception of boss fights and mini-bosses, you can just breeze past most enemies. Not to mention that combat itself is as deep as a petri dish. Not that it was anything akin to Devil May Cry in the first game, but you at least had some kind of moveset for each power-up. Here the power-ups are mostly cosmetic, with the occasional shake-up to the shape of your hitboxes. You also don't have the exact same parry system as before. I've explained how it worked in the first game, but now it's closer to how Spark played, where parried attacks help build the static bar, but you can't convert that into health or stock it up until you have a super form. In turn, you can unleash a massive charge attack or let the static bar build up, since damage scales proportionally to the bar, like a kinda combo system. This kinda comes into play with the de-emphasized combat I mentioned before, because the parry window is very generous in this game, even more so than the first. It comes very close to trivializing most, if not all, the boss fights in the game though. With all that being said, I found that most of my suspicions I had before playing the game were confirmed. Spark had a rough transition to 3D. No, we're not doing that shit. Knock it off. But this game is clearly a prototype for what Spark 3 would become. This isn't a dig at the game itself though. Even if it is the shortest game in the trilogy, I still had fun with what it had to offer. I think the game nailed down the fast-paced platformer gameplay it set out to do very well. I was just zipping through all the levels because it lent enough power to the player to do so. And I've said it before, but I think it bears repeating that the fact that this game, an indie game, came out so soon after the first with such a drastic change in gameplay is truly a feat on its own. This is still a game I can recommend, but that comes with an asterisk. I don't think it's the game to start with, but if you've enjoyed any of the other games in the series, then you'd easily enjoy Spark 2, Electric Boogaloo. Oh my god, that's what it should have been called. You know what, I'm docking a point for that. I know I've been waiting for this. Have you been waiting for this? Spark the Electric Jester 3, baby! This is the game that brought my attention back to the series. I remember the feeling decently well. The cover art especially caught my eye. Spark got a new look? I know it's just a jacket, but you know what they say, a toothpick changes everything. Seeing the trailer too, the game just looked so good. I was hooked, and I was hyped. I also remember feeling a bit bad for the Speedy Jester at the time too. After all, a 3D speed-based platformer was coming out months before Sonic Frontiers. Fortunately, it looked like, in spite of the fact that Spark 3 and Frontiers had such a close release date, the game seems to be doing very well, and I for one am very happy to see that. I already know this game is great, but coming off of Spark 2 really shows just how much of an overall improvement Spark 3 is by comparison. To get this out of the way, I'm not going to cover the story of the game. The game is still relatively new, so I don't want to spoil anything there. I also don't want to sound like a broken record over the simplicity of the plot. However, I will say that Spark 3 actually shocked me with how much more polished the story was compared to its prior entries in that regard. It probably helps that a lot of the loose ends left by the other two games are finally dealt with here, and I think it has a pretty surprising turn that the series took as well. So, I'll keep that surprise for those that haven't gotten to the game yet. As mentioned before, Spark 3 is an upgrade from Spark 2 in every way. Not that Spark 2 looked bad at all, but the graphics are much more sleek in its stylization this time around. As also mentioned before, Spark looks great with his new look, and it's good to have him back. Spark has all the same capabilities as Fark did in Spark 2, and then some. Spark can now wall run, and the static bar has some new changes as well. It's no longer just a resource to use for a big attack, or even as a way to increase combo damage. In fact, that has been moved to its own bar below the static bar. Now, there are additional upgrades and power-ups in the shop that can change up gameplay momentarily, or just as a nice pick-me-up. There are things like a temporary speed boost, a large burst attack, and even a quick heal, all of which use different amounts of static energy. This time, Spark has 4 free slots to store these power-ups, so it's just a matter of managing when to use your static energy and how. Speaking of the shop is also where Spark can buy new moves to use in combat, which has been immensely improved upon now. Contrary to Spark 2, there are now a lot more sections of the game that require combat to progress. Unfortunately, the parry is still a little mindless to use, but to mitigate that, enemies can now use moves that are unable to be parried. This means you have to be a lot quicker on your feet and actually maneuver around the battlefield. Combos themselves are more expansive than just mashing light or heavy attacks a bunch. There are now more ways to interlink different kinds of attacks into the same combo, and even more ways to launch enemies upwards to continue the combo in the air. All this culminates into the best combat the series has seen. Slight downside is that the traditional power-ups, or as the game calls them, Jester powers, are just like Spark 2, mostly cosmetic. It kind of feels like it's even more so in this game because all except one of the Jester powers are just playing as a different character. Granted, one of those characters is Fark, and he actually plays like the best of how he played in Spark 1 and 2. It's really a shame because Spark ends up feeling the most fleshed out since none of the extra moves you can get transfer over to any of the other Jester powers, so there's just less incentive overall to play them. Luckily, with this game, that's the only place my gripes lie, because the speed in this game feels so good. It's not much different from Spark 2, but it somehow has a buttery smooth polish that's hard to explain but easy to understand if you played both games. The levels feel like they have a lot more polished design as well. Along with having just enough open space to be able to make mistakes, some levels bring out these long, winding roads that only someone or something as fast as Spark could realistically traverse. How are cars supposed to drive on these? Every time you go through a boost panel of some kind, the camera now whips behind you to make sure you always know where you're going, so it helps you maintain control with how you are moving at octane speeds, rather than possibly losing that flow state just to adjust the camera. Somehow, there are even more ways to gain speed in this game too. A new addition to some levels are grind rails that you ride on, and you can even crouch on slopes to increase your speed. There's also an upgrade that essentially allows you to do a lightspeed dash on the line of those pips you collect throughout the game. The inspiration isn't even on the sleeve anymore, it's more like a flashy gold chain. Holy shit, that's real! And, in my humble opinion, the creme de la creme of all the changes to Spark's kit, the Jester Dash that was introduced in Spark 2 popped you upward, like it does in Sonic. But in Spark 3, Spark follows the direction he was already going prior to using the technique. This is a slight change, and it does still slow you down a little, but it is a huge difference when it comes to keeping up the momentum while blitzing throughout the levels. One simple tweak, and the mechanic is not only beautiful, but now unique from its inspirational counterpart. Some new additions to the game itself are vehicle segments added to some levels. The game even starts with one to let you know that things are already going to be a bit different from before. I'd say the car is just as fast as Spark, but the difference in controls are enough to make it a nice change of pace every now and then. Oh, so that's how cars drive on these roads. Oh, okay. The other vehicle is the airship. You can control your altitude, dash for some speed, and you have guns! Yeah! Oh, missiles too? Yeah, baby! Neither of the vehicles overstay their welcome, and add a nice bit of spice that hasn't really been seen in the series until now. Another interesting change brought to this game has to do with level progression. In Spark 1, you went to the next stage immediately. It was borderline seamless. If you wanted to go to a specific stage, there was a level select somewhere in the start menu. In Spark 2, there was a world map now. It was nice to get a somewhat satellite view of where in the world that level was located, but it was pretty straightforward otherwise. In Spark 3, you have the same world map as Spark 2, but levels are now introduced in bursts. For the most part, you have your main levels whose main objective is to reach the goal, but within those levels are sub-objectives. There are speed medals awarded to those who complete the level in a short amount of time, there are score medals awarded to those who rack up a lot of points by the end of the level, and there are exploration medals awarded to those who are curious enough to take their time and comb their way through each level. These sub-objectives are optional of course, but they are great ways to introduce different ways of playing throughout the same level, and give options to people with different kinds of playstyles. It's just a brilliant system. The levels themselves even shake things up from time to time. Some levels are explicitly centered around speed or score, sometimes you have to reach the goal within the time limit, other times you have to scour a small sandbox to find a certain amount of medallions to complete the level. There are even levels that are solely meant to test the player on how to use certain mechanics within the game. The most important part is that you are awarded a Freedom Medal when the level is completed. Freedom Medals are needed to progress further in the game because at certain points the game blocks off progression until a threshold is met. Thorough players who meticulously go through every level that is presented to them, like I did, will not have an issue with that because the threshold will likely be met when the time comes. Those who chose to skip over certain levels will probably have to go back to earn some medals for the threshold, but you can make it through the whole game without completing every single level the game has to offer. Oh, the Sonic-inspired game pulls inspiration from Mario, huh? I honestly can't express enough just how good Spark 3 is. It's like this is what the series was building up to. Each entry in the trilogy is clearly a love letter to the video game franchises that inspired it. Spark the Electric Jester is a series I can highly recommend to all of you out there. If you only ever feel like giving one of these games a chance, I say get Spark 3. There was even an update with free DLC that dropped not too long ago that actually added levels from Spark 2 into Spark 3, so it's practically the best package in the series. Before closing out, I do want to take a moment and acknowledge a certain group of people within the fan base, and I am specifically talking about the fans who are also Sonic fans, but more so those kind of Sonic fans. You know who I'm talking about, or at least you know who you are. It is perfectly fine to prop up indie games, especially if they happen to tick the exact boxes you were looking for in another franchise that tends to drop the ball. However, I think it does spark an injustice when used as a talking point against a series like Sonic the Hedgehog. It is no secret that with every good release of a Sonic game, there will come the painfully mediocre ones, and even the outright bad ones. Although it doesn't help that it has become a tradition once every decade or so to do revisionist history on a truly bad game for some reason, but I digress. It's important to realize that we would not even have Spark without Sonic. It is literally a foundational pillar of the series. What makes Spark so special is that it is not only plainly brazen about where its roots lie, but it's how it takes those roots and changes them enough to make it its own. Spark is a series not created out of spite, but out of passion and love for the very inspirations it draws from. There's no need to pit two bad bitches against each other. Take it from me, I love Sonic the Hedgehog, flaws included. And now I love Spark the Electric Jester too. I have two cakes, so to speak, and you can too. It's not like I got to order from a secret menu or something. All it takes is just enjoying what each game has to offer in their own right. Whoo! What a doozy. I hope you enjoyed the video. I worked hard on it. If you'd like to see more of these concentrated videos, or maybe you'd rather have them separated into their own, let me know in the comments below. While you're there, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and most importantly, thank you for watching.